Spyro done came to the neighborhood, cuz. Look, there he is right there. Spyro, what up, baby? Spit that fire one time. I told you had to come back. You've been gone too long. They ready for you.
Hi guys, gals and they thems. Welcome to my video Spyro, Enter the Dragonfly. Since we're still waiting on a Spyro 4, I guess I can play what was the equivalent of 4 back in the early days of the PS2, even if it's now been shunned as a sequel. This is a game I owned when I was small, but swiftly stopped playing after my peanut-sized child brain realised this game was a buggy, unfinished mess. You know there's something wrong with the game when speedrunners can complete it in literal minutes. Ever since, my aversion for this specific game in my favourite franchise has been so harsh, I've never played it properly. I've never even completed it. I didn't even leave the hub world. So I figured, why don't I play through this game and give it my honest review? I won't be 100%ing it for my own sanity though. So here we go. Yay. The game starts off with Hunter getting spooked by an inflatable. Clearly burp dolls aren't his thing. Yet seconds later he doesn't seem fazed by Ripto rising out of the ground, probably rising from hell, since, you know, he should be dead. I guess that swimming lava didn't matter. Maybe that ugly disco ball on his stick has some regen powers. Sparks no longer has subtitles when he talks during cutscenes, so it's a guessing game on what he's actually saying. Although it's not much of a loss, with the story being as lackluster as it is, I doubt even Sparks could be able to save it. Hunter states the obvious in case you were asleep, but don't worry, Bianca can help. But not before the music jarringly comes in to drown out her voice.
Spyro, Hunter, don't worry. I think I know where to start. Follow
Honestly,
me.
it's so abrupt, it just adds to how intentionally funny this is. These poorly portrayed plasticine-faced pathetic polygons are ready to set out, and your main objective in this game is to collect dragonflies. They left because they knew this game was going to be rubbish and wanted nothing to do with it. Starting off, each level looks very open and seems to have way too much empty space. The gems look nice and shiny, but so many other models and textures look awful. Despite this being what was at the time the next-gen Spyro game, it looks worse than the PS1 games before it. The textures are ugly, as are the character models. Spyro looks okay, a little gormless, but that's where their efforts stopped. He certainly looked worse.
Look how they mess with my boy.
Bianca looks like communist Bugs Bunny, Hunter looks like Crack Fox, and Ripto, well, he just looks like that. And since when could Gulp and Crush talk?
What do we want this time, boss?
The models of NPCs all look like mostly recycled models from previous games. There were a few original character models, such as the Riptox though. The beginning of the game has you constantly interrupted for mostly redundant tutorials, and it affects the momentum terribly. Also, I got to look into a sheep's ass within seconds of playing. Nice. One good thing to say about the game is the music. There are some catchy tunes once again provided by Stuart Copeland. My favourite tracks are Luau Island, Thieves' Den and the Rainbow Speedway. They don't quite sound Spyro-y to me, but they're catchy enough. Most of them unfortunately didn't pass the vibe check. It's also worth noting that even though Copeland is credited with making the music for this game, he wasn't alone in doing so. Peter Neff was also responsible for composing Rainbow Speedway and Thieves' Den, along with a few others, and interestingly, Kenneth Burgermaster was also involved, but no one seems to know how much he inputted into the process. The levels in the game are so long that the music has to loop, which would be fine if you weren't shoved into an awkward silence every 3 minutes once the track finished. When you get your first rune stone, go to the Spirit Dragon statue to get Bubble Breath. You'll use this breath to catch the dragonflies, if you can manage to hit them. The hitboxes are god-awful, and I'd look past it if they weren't the main collectible in the game. The added salt in the wound is the way they mock you whilst you continuously get gaslighted into thinking you never hit them. They opted to go for the same style as Year of the Dragon, and each dragonfly has a name, and some of them are ridiculous. It's like they just threw a book on the floor, pointed at a random word in it and went, yep, that'll do. You got your usual pedestrian names such as Holly, Martin and Karen. She wants to speak to your manager.
Hey, it's Karen.
And then you've got some pretty extra bug names, Neo and Morpheus, Tashi Station, Clearly someone liked their nerdy movies.
Hello there.
The only creative name I noticed was Damsel, which is named after a damselfly. The creativeness stops there though, as all the dragonflies look identical, except for being different colours, unlike the dragon babies in the previous game. Each tutorial sounds more condescending than the last. Hunter talks to you like you were dropped on your head as a kid. He runs around like he crapped his pants, if he was wearing any. What looks like the power-up portals you get in Spyro 2 and 3 are now called challenge portals. It has a dragonfly sealed inside it that you can release upon completing the portal's challenge. Pretty self-explanatory. Spyro actually asks Sparks how to use the portal, stating there's no switches. Like, has he just developed amnesia? They're identical to power-up portals. I get these are here as small tutorials for anyone who's lucky enough to have this as their first experience of Spyro, but it's very hand-holdy and comes across as patronising. I feel stupid for buying this game. It doesn't mean I am stupid. It gives you a task to destroy a bunch of scarecrows within a time limit, but honestly, the main challenge in this is not throwing up from the disgustingly poor frame rate. I've never got motion sickness from a game that wasn't in VR, so congratulations, I guess. Zoe the Fairy looks okay. Dragonfly Dojo looks very similar to Bamboo Terrace, with ninja enemies that look like Ninja Rhinox from Firework Factory, which is a recurring theme in this game. It wouldn't be the naughties without casual racism. Each corridor is unnecessarily wide and empty. The rice in the paddy fields moving when you step on them is a nice touch though. But you can't touch the flowers like in older games. Boo. The kite quest is a repeat of another recycled part from Spyro 3, except this time the hint is less subtle, which takes away from the original humour of using them as a stepping stone. The speedway in this level is fairly basic. It's back to doing the obstacle courses and the race to get 2 dragonflies. Although again, the hitboxes on the rings suck. The amount of times I lost a race because it said I went off course even though I touched the ring. Moneybags is back to swindle you out of your gems. He can now for some reason cast magic, although this is the only time you'll see him. He never shows up again, and to be honest, that loses the main incentive to collect the gems in this game. Aside from just getting 100%, there's no real reason to pick them up anymore. At least they're shiny, I guess. Sometimes textures and assets will be missing, and there's a chance you can softlock the game in certain scenarios. There's a tank mission in the dojo which seems a bit out of place. It's not too boring, it's just there as an extra thing to do, I guess. It doesn't really pose as much of a challenge, but it does drag on a bit.
Brother, this guy stinks!
Sorry. The sheep turning into lamb chops when he's at them is kind of funny. I decided to fry this fodder that got stuck to put him out of his misery, and he turned into a yummy roast chicken, which is also kind of neat. You can see in some places where they put in a bit of effort and creativity, but it's overshadowed by literally everything else. The farmer is another reused character from a previous Spyro game, and it becomes very clear that they were struggling for new ideas or time with this new entry. The game was massively rushed, with a significant amount of planned content and much needed polish left undone. Universal kept sticking their noses in during development, meddling with ideas, and Universal's interference mandated that the project be entirely restarted a month into production, setting the tone for the kind of development process that would take place. Nearly every element of the game's initial design documents would be scrapped and replaced. The game would miss its initially promised 2001 release date, likely due to the constant changes and additions requested by Universal and competing visions from both Check 6 and Equinox, both of whom were new studios. They were initially eager to start the work on Spyro, but that eagerness wore off with Universal chopping and changing everything constantly without any flexibility for added time, as Universal wanted this game to be released by holiday 2002. The team's management would distrust each other, obviously leading to more difficulties in development. The two studios needed to be working closely together to have any chance of finishing the game on time. The lack of extra time and staffing started to take its toll on both studios. Staff started leaving left and right, and as a result, the ones left behind were left to crunch. No, not you. And some even had to work unpaid overtime. This led to production briefly stopping until both studios came to a mutual agreement. The game was planned to have over 25 levels and would feature the returns of Nasty Nork and Ripto. Instead, we got one hub world and 9 levels, which is significantly less than previous games. The final game only has one underwhelming boss fight against Ripto. The final boss battle can be accessed via a glitch, seconds into starting a new game, and has led to some ridiculous speedrunning records. The final game suffers from very noticeable frame rate issues, countless graphical and gameplay glitches, and incredibly unappealing graphics. The team set out to produce a game with short loading times, but the final product can take over 40 seconds to move between areas in the PlayStation 2 version. I've made countless cups of tea between waiting for levels to load. I even made a nice compilation of my playtime where I was sat waiting for it to load. Stuart Copeland, former drummer for The Police and composer of the iconic soundtrack for the original Spyro trilogy, would return to work on Enter the Dragonfly. This would be Copeland's last soundtrack for the series, until he returned to remaster the Reignited Trilogy's soundtrack, recalling that he felt that he and Universal were not on the same page anymore. After seeing marketing material for the game that he couldn't recognise as Spyro, this is noticeable in the music. The tracks are catchy, but most don't match the vibe of the area they represent. The original pitch was going to introduce an evil dragon who was stealing the essences of other dragons to become more powerful. Spyro would have to travel across the dragon world to restore those essences and defeat the evil dragon. However, the lead designer claimed that there are no evil dragons in the world of Spyro, so existing villains were chosen to be used instead and shoehorned into the story. Of course, later on in A Hero's Tale, we get Red the Dragon as an antagonist, and Cinder in A New Beginning. More than 100 Dragonflies were planned according to early press reports, with over 25 levels and a frame rate of 60 frames per second. And relatively fast loading times. Despite the long development cycle of over 2 years, it still suffered from inconsistent frame rate, long loading times, graphical glitches, sound issues and lockups. As a result, Nasty Nork doesn't appear anywhere in the game at all, although he is mentioned by Ripto. There are only 9 levels for the player to explore and 90 Dragonflies to collect. In addition, the popular characters Moneybags and Bianca appear just once in the whole game. Bianca at the very beginning, where she mysteriously disappears afterwards and does not return until the player finishes the game, and Moneybags in Dragonfly Dojo, where he charges Spyro gems to get across a chasm. A design document that was obtained in 2020 revealed nearly a dozen cut levels that had never been heard of, as well as plans for 4 hub worlds for the game: the Sunshine Hub, the Rain Hub, Snow Hub, and the Windy Hub, all in that order. It's also stated that a level called Haunted House level would have had giant spiders as enemies. The final game has giant spider enemies in Jurassic Jungle's Tower minigame instead. It suggests that some of the early characters and ideas made into the final game in other ways that they weren't originally intended for. This is also further proven by the Riptop pterodactyls being mentioned for a cut tornado level. They would make it into the final game in the place of Monkey Monastery's flying Ripdocs. This theme continues with many other assets in the final game, such as most of the chests, which have cut level names written on their names. For example, Honey Marsh's chest has EF written on it for the cut level Enchanted Forest, just as Thieves' Den has BA written on it for the cut level Baked Alaska. A pink dragon named Ember was created for Enter the Dragonfly. Her role would have had her as another playable character or even a helper of Spyro, similar to Sparks. However, it was not decided what exactly Ember's final purpose would be, which would lead to her removal. She would later make her debut in Spyro, A Hero's Tale. 5 different composers were assigned to Enter the Dragonfly, including Stuart Copeland, who was the composer for the original trilogy. A large portion of the soundtrack was done by Peter Neff. Other composers included Emiliano Almeida, who composed 4 songs in total, and Kenneth Burgomaster and Emilio Cordera. Stuart Copeland directed these 4 composers and then was given the project files afterwards and added his instrumentation on top of them. In the end, Stuart Copeland was the one who received all the credit, as it was stated in the contracts. 42 music tracks were composed, but only 28 made it into the final game, and 14 would end up being on the Master Disc soundtrack, which was obtained in 2020. Stuart Copeland stated that he started to feel a divergence, with publisher Universal Interactive stating, "I remember the team came in to create the promotional materials for Enter the Dragonfly. They showed me an ad they had, which I didn't even recognise as Spyro. It was country and western themed, and I think that's where the divergence happened for me. We were not on the same page anymore. Both an Xbox and PC port for Enter the Dragonfly were planned, with DirectX engine components for the Xbox being created, but vendor Universal Games wasn't willing to pay the money they owed to Check 6 Studio and Equinox Digital Entertainment for the original 2 versions. As a result, additional development on the final platforms were cancelled in favour of Check 6 to develop a helicopter special forces project that lasted a dozen weeks. Ted Price, the president of Insomniac Games, who oversaw the original Spyro games, even spoke out about how bad he found the game. In an interview, he stated, "Spyro has become an abused stepchild. Spyro Enter the Dragonfly on PS2 and GameCube was an absolute travesty. The game was released in this terrible, unplayable state, despite being only 15% complete when the deadline arrived, according to a former developer, and thus began the downfall of the dragon. The ice physics in Monkey Monastery are terrible. The slide in this level is also terrible. You can barely control where he goes, and sometimes he will just yeet himself off the edge of a cliff. I tried a few times with this minigame, but was aware of how mad it was making me, so I decided to stop. Thieves' Den is probably one of the best levels as far as the original concept and creativity is concerned. It's a cool idea to be able to go to the Thieves' world, where some gems and baskets will run away from you. You'll have to use a wing shield ability here to defeat enemies, deflecting their attacks back on themselves. Although this doesn't always work, and you'll have to get the aim perfect to hit the enemies. Also, the noise they make doesn't go away for a solid 30 seconds when they die. This level also crashed on me, so I had to start it over. I feel like Speedway icons are sped up. Why do they look like that? It's an interesting choice to have the Speedway challenges inside the levels, but I feel if they chose to have them in one hub world they made, it would start to get a little cluttered. Another thing I found confusing as a first-time player of Enter the Dragonfly was the method of getting to the levels. Instead of a named portal to fly through, you just stand on a rock or object that floats you to the world you're heading to. Not as cool as portals, and you leave through portals, so it makes no sense, and of course the platforms you ride are buggy too. One thing I've also noticed, there only ever seems to be gems of values of 1s, 2s and 5s, hardly any 10s, and the 10s I've picked up showed up as a value of 25? Weird. In Honey Marsh, the bag camera really shows its full potential. Along with the constant noise, it's such an overstimulating level, it nearly made me have a meltdown. The tank minigame is so busted it gaslights you into thinking that you didn't hit the targets, and rock spitting is back, but worse, with the slowest animation for picking up the rocks, and sometimes no animation at all. In Jurassic Jungle, there's another minigame which you need to destroy metal riptops while using the armor power-up. It's definitely a nod to Terminator 2. Spyro can't handle those wobbly wooden bridges. After exploring all the areas, the final boss portal is now open with little to no fanfare. If I didn't wander over to the portal, I wouldn't have known. The final fight with Ripto doesn't even hold a candle to the battle for Spyro 2. The first phase sees him protect himself with an ice shield, flame him a few times to get rid of the shield and flame him again to deal damage. Next, he will make himself bigger and surround himself in flames. Simply attack him with your ice breath. If you get 100%, he will turn himself into a mutant. Flame him whilst he's charging his scepter with lightning breath a few times to finish him off. The final segment of the battle goes on way too long due to it bugging and not initiating the final blow. If you do get hit by Ripto in the first 2 phases, you will get stun locked and likely die. It's so annoying. The ending is as jarring as the beginning, with Ripto saying,
No, not again! My plans were so perfect. Twice I put my faith in this staff, and twice it has failed me! Dragons, dragonflies, I can't win! I can't win!
Ripto then flops himself into the portal like a flaccid willy, and just like that the adventure is over. It wasn't much of an adventure, and thank God it's over. Spyro winks at the end, possibly hinting at another new entry coming soon, however that doesn't happen. Instead we get a hero's tale, something like an ode to the original trilogy, with new characters, moves and a slightly different style. I may cover that game in the future, or maybe I'll cover the Legend reboot series, who knows. This production was certainly a victim of piss-poor management from the higher-ups. The lack of direction, communication and general disinterest, and consideration for an adored IP for the sake of making a quick buck was definitely a massive factor in this game's failure. Does that make it a bad game? Technically, yes. You can see where they tried to salvage what little self-respect Spyro had left in some parts of the game, but that is unfortunately overshadowed by the shit show of bugs, ugly models, crappy frame rate, and complete nonsense storyline. Although it was fun to push myself out of bounds and swim around the homeworld. What's up, Hunter? Why are you out here, you weirdo? It's such a pity that the game will go down in history as the worst Spyro game ever. My purple boy did not deserve this. Well, there you have it. That's the meme-worthy shit show that is Spyro Enter the Dragonfly. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It helps a bunch. And if you've got a game in mind that you'd like me to cover, drop a comment and let me know. I need a palate cleanser after that nasty taste was left in my mouth, so the next game I'll be covering will at least be fully functional and maybe even fun too. Otherwise, I might commit crimes. See you soon. Bye bye.